Hi there, welcome back. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's begin. The Roman Empire, a colossus that had ruled over the known world for centuries, now stood at the edge of an abyss. Once its legions had trampled the earth beneath ironclad boots, its banners flying high over conquered lands, its emperors feared and revered. But now, the cracks in its foundation had become too deep to ignore. In the year 376 AD, the first tremors of catastrophe began to shake the empire. A tide of desperate refugees, men, women, and children of the Gothic tribes, arrived at the Danube River, pleading for sanctuary within Rome's borders. Their lands had been ravaged by a new, terrifying enemy from the east, the Huns. The emperor in the east, Valens, faced a decision that would alter the fate of Rome forever. For centuries, Rome had absorbed outsiders, turning them into soldiers, citizens, even emperors. But these were not mere wanderers. The Goths were warriors, hardened by the unforgiving lands of the north. Their leader, Fritigern, spoke the language of desperation and ambition. He offered loyalty in exchange for land, but he knew Rome was no longer the empire of Augustus and Trajan. It was weaker now, corrupt, divided, and stretched too thin. Valens, wary but in need of new soldiers, agreed to their request. But Rome's mercy came at a price. The Goths were herded into provinces along the border, left to starve under the cruelty of corrupt Roman officials who saw them as an opportunity for personal gain. They extorted them, traded rotten meat for gold, and humiliated their warriors. Resentment turned to rage. By 378 AD, that rage exploded into open rebellion. The Goths, once Rome's supplicants, became its invaders. The Battle of Adrianople would become one of the bloodiest defeats in Roman history. On a scorching August afternoon, Valens led his army into battle without waiting for reinforcements from the west. Confident in Rome's superiority, he underestimated his enemy. The Gothic cavalry crashed into the Roman lines like a storm, breaking them apart with ruthless precision. Roman soldiers who had once marched to the ends of the earth in conquest were now the hunted. Valens himself vanished in the chaos. Some say he was burned alive in a farmhouse, others that his body was never found. Whatever the truth, Rome had suffered a wound from which it would never truly recover. This was no longer an empire of unstoppable legions. The balance of power had shifted, and beyond the horizon, more storms gathered. The fields of Adrianople were littered with Roman corpses, their gleaming armor now dulled by blood and dust. The empire had suffered many defeats before, but none like this. The Roman army, once the unstoppable force of the world, had been torn apart by a people it had once thought insignificant. Emperor Valens was dead, and with him died the illusion of Roman invincibility. In the months following the disaster, the Eastern Roman Empire scrambled to recover. A new emperor, Theodosius I, rose to power, burdened with the impossible task of restoring stability. Unlike his predecessors, he understood that brute force alone would not be enough. Rome could not simply crush its enemies anymore. It had to negotiate, adapt, and perhaps most humiliating of all, compromise. The Goths, emboldened by their victory, did not retreat. They roamed freely within Roman lands, no longer mere rebels, but a power unto themselves. Theodosius, lacking the strength to destroy them, offered them something no barbarian tribe had ever received: a treaty that recognized them as an independent force within the empire. In exchange for peace, the Goths were given land, wealth, and even positions in the Roman military. It was a desperate move, but it worked temporarily. The empire bought itself time, yet the price was steep. Rome had made a deal not with a subject people, but with a rival power within its own borders. The very structure of the empire was shifting beneath its feet. The legions, once the backbone of Roman authority, were increasingly filled with barbarian recruits who owed their allegiance not to Rome, but to their own warlords. Meanwhile, in the Western Roman Empire, a different crisis was unfolding. Unlike the wealthier and more fortified East, the West was crumbling under internal decay. Corruption was rampant. Generals and senators plotted against each other, and emperors came and went like shadows. The army, once disciplined and professional, had become unreliable, a mercenary force held together by bribes rather than loyalty. In 395 AD, another disaster struck. Theodosius, the last emperor to rule both East and West, died suddenly. His death shattered what little unity remained. The empire was now permanently divided. The East, centered in Constantinople, and the West, with its capital in Ravenna. This division would prove fatal, for in the shadows, watching and waiting, was a man who would bring the empire to its knees. His name was Alaric, and he was a Goth who had once fought for Rome, but Rome had betrayed him, and soon he would return the favor. Theodosius was dead, and with him the last fragile thread that bound the empire together. His two sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west, inherited his throne, but neither was a warrior. Neither was a leader, and neither had any idea how to stop the storm that was coming. Far to the north, beyond the ruins of past Roman victories, Alaric, once a commander in the Roman army, now the leader of the Visigoths, watched the empire falter. He had fought for Rome at Theodosius's side, spilling Gothic blood in service of the empire, believing it would grant his people a place of honor. But when peace came, Rome turned its back on him. The Goths had been used and discarded, denied the rewards they had been promised. Alaric would not forget. With an army of restless warriors, he moved south, crossing into the empire's heartlands. He no longer sought to serve Rome. He sought vengeance. He sought a kingdom. By 401 AD, Alaric's forces were at the very gates of Italy, the beating heart of the Western Empire. Panic gripped Rome. The emperor, Honorius, was little more than a frightened boy, incapable of ruling. His advisors, more concerned with their own power than with defending the empire, bickered among themselves while the barbarians approached. But Rome was not entirely defenseless. In the empire's moment of greatest peril, one last great general emerged, a man named Stilicho. A hardened veteran of many wars, Stilicho was half Roman, half Vandal, yet fiercely loyal to the empire. Unlike the weak rulers he served, he understood the gravity of the threat. He gathered what remained of the Roman legions and confronted Alaric at Pollentia in 402 AD. The battle was fierce, but Rome had one advantage left: discipline. The legions held firm, and when the dust settled, Alaric had been forced to retreat. Rome had been spared for now, but the battle had come at a terrible cost. Stilicho had saved Italy, yet the empire he defended was still rotting from within. Honorius, weak and paranoid, distrusted his own general, fearing that Stilicho's power eclipsed his own. The emperor's advisors whispered in his ear, poisoning him against the only man capable of holding the empire together. And in 408 AD, Honorius made a fatal decision. He ordered Stilicho's arrest. The empire's last great general was executed. As a traitor, the legions, leaderless and demoralized, collapsed into chaos. Thousands of barbarian soldiers who had once fought for Rome now defected to Alaric. The emperor had slain his own protector, and in doing so, had left Rome exposed. Alaric saw his moment, and this time there would be no one to stop him. Rome had always been an untouchable city. Even in times of war, its walls had stood unbroken, its people secure in the belief that no enemy could breach the heart of the empire. But now, in the year 410 AD, that illusion was about to shatter. With Stilicho dead and the Roman army in disarray, Alaric and his Visigoth warriors marched south, their banners fluttering in the warm Italian winds. No force remained to oppose them. The empire was paralyzed, its leaders consumed by fear and betrayal, its soldiers deserting, its citizens waiting in silence for the storm to arrive. By the summer of 410, the Visigoths stood at the gates of Rome. For the first time in 80 centuries, the Eternal City faced the unthinkable invasion. Inside the walls, terror gripped the people. The streets, once alive with merchants and senators, now echoed with whispers of despair. Food was scarce, and the air was thick with the scent of desperation. Rome's senators sent envoys to Alaric, hoping to buy their salvation with gold. Alaric listened. He knew Rome was weak. He did not wish to destroy the city, only to claim what was his, lands for his people, recognition of his authority, and an end to Rome's treachery. But the emperor, Honorius, still refused to negotiate. Safe within the fortified city of Ravenna, far from Rome's suffering, he ignored the warnings. He believed the walls of Rome would hold. He was wrong. On the night of August 24, 410 AD, treachery opened the gates. An unknown hand, perhaps a slave, perhaps a desperate citizen, unbarred the doors that had stood closed for centuries, and into Rome the Visigoths poured. The sack of Rome had begun. The city burned. The streets filled with the screams of the dying, the clash of steel, the wailing of the helpless. Temples were looted, palaces ransacked, treasures stolen. The mighty city, once the heart of an empire, was now at the mercy of the very barbarians it had once enslaved. Yet for all the destruction, Alaric showed restraint. His warriors did not level Rome, as many had feared. The great churches, including St. Peter's Basilica, were left untouched. Some historians say it was out of respect for the Christian faith. Others believe Alaric saw Rome not as a ruin to be destroyed, but as a prize to be claimed. For 3 days, the Visigoths ruled the city. Then, just as swiftly as they had arrived, they left, taking with them gold, silver, and thousands of prisoners. Rome, the city that had once ruled the world, had fallen. In the courts of Ravenna, Emperor Honorius barely reacted. When news of the sack reached him, he is said to have misunderstood, believing his pet rooster, also named Rome, had died. His ignorance was the final insult to the empire he was supposed to protect. The world now knew the truth. Rome was no longer invincible, and its fall had only just begun. The sack of Rome sent shockwaves through the empire. For centuries, the Eternal City had been the symbol of civilization, the heart of a world that stretched from the cold shores of Britannia to the burning sands of Africa. Now it lay humbled, its people shattered, its rulers disgraced. Across the empire, fear spread like wildfire. If Rome could fall, what place was truly safe? The provinces, already weakened by neglect, grew restless. In Gaul, Hispania, and Britannia, the legions had long been stretched thin, their strength drained to protect Italy. Now, with the empire crumbling, the frontier provinces began to break away. In Britannia, the Roman governors looked to Ravenna for guidance, but none came. Honorius, hiding behind his walls, had abandoned them. The last Roman soldiers in Britain received no reinforcements, no pay, no orders. By 410 AD, they had no choice but to declare their independence. The island, once a proud Roman province, was now left to fend for itself. In Gaul, chaos reigned. The Franks, the Burgundians, and the Alemanni sensed Rome's weakness and pushed deeper into Roman lands. The once mighty province was dissolving into a patchwork of warlords and invaders. And in Hispania, the Vandals, a fierce Germanic tribe, crossed the Pyrenees. They burned villages, slaughtered Roman garrisons, and carved out their own kingdom. The empire's western provinces were no longer Roman in anything but name. Yet, amidst the ruins, some still clung to the old ways. Aetius, a Roman general rising through the ranks, saw the empire's weakness and sought to restore its strength. Unlike the cowards in Ravenna, he understood that Rome could not survive without allies. If the empire was to endure, it had to embrace the very barbarians it had once fought. Aetius turned to a powerful force, the Huns. Far to the east, beyond the crumbling frontiers of Rome, a new empire was rising. The Huns, a people feared even by the Goths, were led by a man whose name would strike terror into the hearts of Romans and barbarians alike, Attila. For now, the Huns were willing to serve as mercenaries, fighting for gold and land. Aetius, desperate for an army, brought them into the Roman ranks, using them to crush rebel tribes and restore order where he could. But this alliance was fragile. The Huns were not loyal subjects. They were a storm waiting to break, and when it did, the empire would face its greatest test yet. For Attila did not merely seek gold, he sought an empire of his own. For years, the Huns had been a shadow on the empire's eastern frontier, a storm gathering strength. But now, under the rule of Attila, they had become an unstoppable force. He was no ordinary warlord. He was a man whose ambition burned hotter than the flames that consumed Rome's fallen cities. Attila did not seek mere plunder. He sought domination. By the early 440s AD, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, had learned to fear his name. The mighty walls of the imperial capital were the only thing that kept Attila from tearing it apart, but even so, the Eastern emperors, weak and terrified, paid him vast sums of gold to keep the Huns at bay. For a time, Attila was content with these tributes. But the West was weaker, more divided, more vulnerable, and in 450 AD, he found his excuse to strike. A letter arrived at his camp sealed with imperial authority. It was from Honoria, the ambitious and rebellious sister of Emperor Valentinian III. Frustrated with her lack of power, she had secretly written to Attila, offering herself in marriage and asking for his help. Attila saw an opportunity. He declared that Honoria was his rightful bride and demanded half of the Western Roman Empire as her dowry. Valentinian III, horrified, refused. Attila had his war. With an army unlike anything the West had ever faced, Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, and countless other tribes, he crossed the Rhine River in 451 AD. Gaul, already weakened by years of barbarian invasions, was now the battleground for Rome's survival. But Rome still had one hope: Flavius Aetius, the last great Roman general. Aetius knew that the Western Empire alone could not stop Attila. The legions were weak, the emperor incompetent, and Rome's allies hesitant. So he did the unthinkable. He forged an alliance with the Visigoths, the same people who had sacked Rome decades earlier. For once, Goth and Roman stood side by side. And in June 451 AD, on the fields of Chalons, the fate of the empire was decided, the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. The sun hung low over the plains of Gaul as the armies gathered. Attila's forces stretched as far as the eye could see, their banners fluttering in the wind. His warriors, hardened by years of conquest, thirsted for blood. Opposing them stood the Roman Visigothic alliance led by Aetius and King Theodoric I of the Visigoths. It was a fragile alliance, built on necessity rather than trust, but it was Rome's last hope. The battle that followed was one of the bloodiest in history. The earth shook beneath the charge of Gothic cavalry, crashing into the Hun ranks like a tidal wave. The legions, though weakened, fought with desperate fury. Attila himself, mounted on horseback, watched the chaos unfold. His warriors pushed forward, nearly breaking the Roman lines, but the Visigoths struck back. King Theodoric fell in battle, yet his death only enraged his people further. As the sun set, the battlefield was a wasteland of corpses, and for the first time, Attila was forced to retreat. Rome had won. But it was a hollow victory, the calm before. The end, though Attila had been stopped in Gaul, he was far from finished. In 452 AD, he turned his gaze south, to the heart of the empire itself. He invaded Italy, burning city after city, leaving nothing but ashes in his wake. Rome itself stood defenseless. The emperor was powerless, the legions too few. The city that had ruled the world now awaited its final destruction, and yet, at the gates of Rome, something unexpected happened. Pope Leo X, unarmed and without an army, rode out to meet Attila. What was said between them is lost to history. Some say the Pope warned of divine punishment. Others believe Attila's army was weakened by disease and exhaustion. But whatever the reason, the unthinkable happened. Attila turned back. Rome was spared, but the empire was still dying. Attila would not live to try again. In 453 AD, he died suddenly on his wedding night, perhaps from a burst blood vessel, perhaps poisoned. His empire crumbled without him, scattering into warring factions. For a brief moment, Rome could breathe. But its true destroyers were already inside its gates, and soon the empire itself would fall. Attila was dead, but Rome was not safe. The battlefields of Gaul and the plains of Italy had been drenched in blood, yet the empire had not collapsed, not yet. It still had one protector, one final warrior who carried the last hopes of Rome. On his shoulders, his name was Flavius Aetius. For decades, Aetius had been Rome's shield. He had defeated the Visigoths, crushed rebellions, and, against all odds, had halted Attila the Hun at the Battle of Chalons. But in the imperial court, there were those who hated him. Emperor Valentinian III, weak and paranoid, resented Aetius' power. He feared that the general, Rome's last great leader, was growing too influential. In 454 AD, Aetius entered the imperial palace in Ravenna. He believed he was there to discuss the future of the empire. Instead, Valentinian III drew his sword and, with his own hands, stabbed Aetius to death. A Roman chronicler would later say, "I do not know whether he was more foolish in killing Aetius or in not realizing that he himself would soon perish." He was right. Without Aetius, the Western Empire was like a ship without a captain, adrift in stormy seas. The very next year, in 455 AD, Emperor Valentinian III was assassinated by his own guards. Rome was now truly defenseless, and the storm was coming. The Vandals strike across the Mediterranean in the rich province of North Africa. A new enemy had risen. The Vandals. Once mere wanderers, they had now built a powerful kingdom under their ruthless king, Genseric. And in 455 AD, they set sail for Italy, their warships cutting through the waves, their warriors thirsting for conquest. Rome, still reeling from Aetius' murder and Valentinian's death, could do nothing. No army stood to oppose them. No leader remained to rally the people. For the second time in less than 50 years, Rome was at the mercy of invaders. On June 2, 455 AD, the Vandal fleet arrived at the mouth of the Tiber River. The people of Rome, terrified and helpless, could do nothing but watch as Genseric's warriors marched through their gates. But unlike Alaric's Visigoths, who had spared much of the city, the Vandals came not to conquer, but to destroy. For 14 days, they looted Rome without restraint. Temples were stripped of their treasures, palaces were burned. The great bronze roof of the Temple of Jupiter was torn apart. Even the Empress, Licinia Eudoxia, was taken captive, carried off to Africa, along with thousands of Roman citizens. The time the Vandals left, Rome was a broken shell. The city, once the center of the world, had been utterly humiliated. The word vandalism would forever be linked to their destruction. But the worst was still to come. The shadow of Odoacer. Now the empire was collapsing under its own weight. The provinces had fallen one by one. Britannia, Hispania, Gaul, and Africa were gone. What remained of the empire was Italy alone, and even that was barely Roman. Barbarians filled the army. Roman generals were nothing more than figureheads, their power controlled by foreign warlords. And then, in 476 AD, the final blow came. A Germanic chieftain named Odoacer, once a soldier in Rome's army, led a rebellion against the last Roman emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus. Romulus was weak, a mere puppet placed on the throne by his father, a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of imperial power. But Odoacer had no patience for illusions. He marched into Ravenna, the Caliph's last capital of the Western Empire. The city surrendered without a fight. Romulus Augustulus, the final emperor of Rome, was dragged from his throne. But there was no grand execution, no dramatic end. Odoacer simply sent him away to live in obscurity. Rome was so weak that even its last emperor was not worth killing, and with that, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. For over 1,000 years, Rome had ruled. Its legions had conquered continents. Its laws had shaped civilizations. Its name had been feared by the world. But now, in 476 AD, it was gone. Odoacer declared himself king of Italy, ruling not as a Roman, but as a barbarian overlord. The Senate, once the heart of Roman politics, withered into irrelevance. Rome, the empire that had once stretched from Britain to Syria, had fallen into darkness, and yet its legacy was far from over. The Western Roman Empire was dead, but death in history is rarely the end. It is merely the beginning of something new. In 476 AD, Odoacer ruled Italy as its king, a barbarian wearing the shattered crown of Rome. The Senate still existed, but it held no power. The legions, once the pride of the empire, were now war bands led by chieftains. And across the former Roman provinces, new kingdoms were rising: the Visigoths in Gaul and Spain, the Vandals in North Africa, the Franks in the north, the Ostrogoths waiting in the east. Yet, even as Rome fell, its memory remained. In the east, Constantinople still stood. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, had watched as its western half collapsed under the weight of corruption, invasion, and war. But unlike the West, it had survived, and it would not forget the empire that had once ruled the world. For the men of the East, Rome's fall was not an ending. It was unfinished business, the dream of the empire the years past. Odoacer ruled Italy, but his kingdom was weak. His barbarian warriors controlled the land, yet the Roman population, now little more than subjects, still saw themselves as Romans. They longed for an emperor, for order, for a return to the greatness that had been lost. And far to the east, a new power was watching. Theodoric the Great, king of the Ostrogoths, had served in the armies of Constantinople. He had learned Roman ways, studied Roman strategy, and now he wanted more than just land. He wanted to rule as a king, but in the name of Rome. In 488 AD, he led his army into Italy, striking at Odoacer's forces. The two warlords battled for 4 years, cities burning, fields trampled under marching armies. Finally, in 493 AD, Theodoric marched into Ravenna, the last capital of the Western Roman Empire. He met Odoacer at a banquet, swore peace, then killed him with his own hands. The message was clear. Theodoric was now master of Italy, but unlike Odoacer, Theodoric did not rule as a conqueror. He declared himself the protector of Roman civilization. He rebuilt roads, restored laws, and preserved the traditions of Rome. His Gothic warriors remained separate from the Roman population, but they followed Roman customs. For a time, it seemed that perhaps, just perhaps, Rome could live on, not as an empire, but as an idea. Yet, the world had changed too much. The empire was gone, and nothing could bring it back. The last echo of Rome. For nearly a century after its fall, people still whispered of Rome. The merchants of the Mediterranean still traded with its coins, its roads still led through Europe, its ruins still stood in silent defiance of time. But the world belonged to the kingdoms of the barbarians now. And yet, one last shadow of Rome remained, the Eastern Empire, Byzantium. From the golden city of Constantinople, emperors still ruled, calling themselves Romans, even as their language had shifted from Latin to Greek. And in 527 AD, one of the greatest of them all ascended the throne, Justinian the Fifth. Justinian did not see the Western Empire as dead. To him, it had been stolen by invaders, and he would take it back. In 535 AD, his armies set sail. Led by his brilliant general Belisarius, they struck at the Ostrogothic kingdom of Italy. Over the next 20 years, war raged across the land, once ruled by Rome. The Byzantines recaptured Sicily, Italy, and even Rome itself. For a moment, it seemed the empire would be reborn, but it was an illusion. Italy had become a wasteland, cities abandoned, fields barren, the population shattered by war. The dream of Rome was just that, a dream. And though the Eastern Empire would endure for centuries, it would never truly restore what had been lost. The Roman Empire was gone, but its legacy, that would last forever. Rome had fallen, but the world it had shaped was only beginning to take form. By the end of the 6th century AD, the Western world was no longer ruled by emperors. Kings and warlords now held power, carving the old empire into their own domains. The lands that had once been Rome's heart, Italy, Gaul, Spain, and Britain, were now a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms, ruled by Goths, Franks, and Saxons. Yet, even as these new rulers claimed power, they could not erase what Rome had left behind. The legacy of Rome in the new kingdoms, though the Western Empire had collapsed, its laws, culture, and language refused to disappear. The barbarian kings, though conquerors, did not destroy Roman civilization. They adopted it. The Visigoths in Spain kept Roman law, Latin language, and even Roman titles for their officials. The Franks in Gaul blended Roman customs with their own, eventually forming what would become France. The Anglo-Saxons in Britain took over Roman lands but built their own kingdoms atop the ruins of Roman towns. In Italy, Theodoric the Great had ruled as a Roman-style king, maintaining Rome's traditions. But after his death in 526 AD, his Ostrogothic kingdom fell apart. By 568 AD, a new wave of invaders arrived, the Lombards, fierce warriors from the north. They shattered what little remained of Roman Italy, reducing it to a land of warring duchies and city-states. And yet, Rome itself still stood. The city, though weak and depopulated, had not been abandoned. It still held one final source of power, the Church. The rise of the papacy in the absence of emperors, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, slowly became the most powerful figure in the West. The empire had left behind a vast religious network, with bishops in every major city. But in Rome, the Pope was not just a religious leader. He became a political figure, negotiating with kings, organizing defenses, and even governing the city itself. By 590 AD, a man named Gregory the Great became Pope, and in his hands, the papacy transformed. He sent missionaries to convert the Anglo-Saxons in Britain, spreading Christianity across the north. He rebuilt Rome's administration, making the church the true power in the city. He negotiated with barbarian kings, acting as Rome's last diplomat. Under Gregory, the Pope was no longer just a spiritual leader. He was now a ruler. And as the centuries passed, the power of the papacy would grow, shaping the future of Europe. The Byzantine Wars and the final death of Rome. Meanwhile, in the east, Constantinople still stood. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of Rome, held firm against enemies on all sides. But Justinian's dream of restoring the empire had come at a terrible cost. The wars against the Goths and Vandals had drained Byzantium's resources. Italy was a ruin, Spain was lost again, and North Africa was barely holding on. Then, in 610 AD, a new emperor rose, Heraclius, and he had a new enemy to face. From the east, the Persian Empire had struck deep into Byzantine lands. By 614 AD, they had captured Jerusalem, taking the true cross, one of Christianity's holiest relics. By 618 AD, they had taken Egypt, cutting off the empire's richest province. For a moment, it seemed as if even the Eastern Empire, the last Roman state, would fall. But Heraclius refused to surrender. He launched a brilliant counterattack, striking deep into Persia, reclaiming Jerusalem and defeating the Persian king in battle. Rome's eastern half had survived, but in the deserts of Arabia, a new force was rising, one that would shake the world forever. As the Byzantine Empire faced threats from Persia and the Slavs in the east, a new challenge emerged from the south, the rise of Islam. In 610 AD, a man named Muhammad began receiving visions. Claiming to be the final prophet of God, he founded a new religion based on monotheism, social justice, and the unity of all believers under Allah. Within a few decades, Muhammad's followers, the Muslims, spread rapidly across the Arabian Peninsula. By the time of his death in 632 AD, Islam was not only a faith, but a formidable political and military force, the conquests. With the death of Muhammad, his followers, the caliphs, continued his work, expanding the influence of Islam at a breathtaking pace. In the 7th century, the Muslim armies began a series of military campaigns that would forever change the political landscape of the ancient world. In 634 AD, the Muslims defeated the Byzantine army at the Battle of Yarmouk, capturing Syria and Palestine, including the holy city of Jerusalem. By 642 AD, Egypt, the richest province of the Byzantine Empire, was lost to Islam. By 711 AD, the Muslims crossed into Spain, beginning an occupation that would last for centuries. With each victory, Islam took more territory. The Byzantine Empire, already weakened by internal strife and the Persian Wars, lost vast swaths of land. And for the first time, the Western world faced a challenge from the south. Not just the barbarians of the north, Byzantium's new role though. The Byzantine Empire had survived the initial onslaught of Islam. The loss of its richest territories, the heartlands of Syria, Egypt, and North Africa, meant that Constantinople was no longer the center of the Mediterranean world. The once great city, now focused on defending itself from the Muslim threat, slowly became a shadow of its former glory. By the time of the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire was a much smaller state, confined to the eastern Mediterranean. Even as it tried to stave off invasions from the Seljuk Turks, it found itself once again at war with the West. This time, the armies of the Crusaders, who were marching east to reclaim Jerusalem. The rise of Islam had forever changed the course of history. What had once been Roman territory was now under the control of Muslim rulers who established empires from the Umayyads to the Abbasids. For the Byzantine Empire, the dream of restoring the Roman Empire, of reviving the grandeur of Rome, was over. It would never fully reclaim the glory it had once known. The decline of Rome's eternal dream as, centuries passed, the memory of Rome's imperial power began to fade. The Western Roman Empire had fallen in 476 AD, and the Eastern Roman Empire, though still standing in Constantinople, was slowly being diminished by constant threats from both East and West. The rise of Islam and the fragmentation of the Mediterranean world left Rome's legacy fractured. Even the papacy, once a powerful force in the West, would find itself caught between the ambitions of kings, the spread of new ideologies, and the relentless tides of change. But still, Rome's legacy endured. The Roman legacy in the world Though the Roman Empire no longer existed in its former glory, its legacy would echo through the ages. Roman law would become the foundation for legal systems in much of Europe. The Latin language, though no longer spoken in the streets, would evolve into the Romance languages: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman architecture, with its arches and domes, would inspire builders for centuries to come. In the Middle Ages, the idea of Rome, of a unified empire, a land of law and order, a center of civilization, would continue to inspire rulers. In 800 AD, Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor, attempting to revive the idea of the Roman Empire in the West. Although this Holy Roman Empire was far from the power and unity of the original, it was a symbol that the idea of Rome could not be easily forgotten. The Renaissance, a cultural revival in the 14th and 15th centuries, would return to Roman ideals, not only in art and literature, but also in philosophy and politics. The ancient Roman world would serve as a model for the new vision of Europe, the final end of Byzantium, yet the Byzantine Empire, the last vestige of Rome, would eventually fall. In 1453 AD, after centuries of decline, Constantinople was captured by the Ottoman Turks, led by Mehmed II. The fall of Constantinople marked the final end of the Roman Empire. The last Roman emperor, Constantine II, died in battle, and the city that had once stood as the heart of the Roman Empire was no more. The Ottoman Empire now ruled the East, and Europe would never again see the united empire that had once stretched from the British Isles to the sands of Egypt. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked the final chapter in the ancient tale of Rome. Yet Rome's essence, its culture, its influence, its philosophy would live on, not in the form of an empire, but in the hearts and minds of the people. Who came after? After the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, the Roman legacy seemed to fade into the past. The Byzantine Empire was no more, and with it, the eastern portion of what had once been the Roman world. But for Europe, this moment marked a rebirth, the dawning of a new age, the Renaissance, Rome reborn, the Renaissance beginning. In the 14th century and peaking in the 15th and 16th centuries was a time of rediscovery. It was a time when the classical world of Greece and Rome returned to the forefront of human consciousness. Scholars, artists, and thinkers turned to ancient Roman texts, uncovering a wealth of knowledge about politics, philosophy, and art that had been buried for centuries. It was in this era that Rome was reborn, not as an empire, but as an idea. Revival of Roman ideals during the Renaissance, artists and scholars began to see themselves as heirs to the ancient Roman tradition. They looked to Roman sculpture, architecture, and literature for inspiration. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, the great artists of the period, were deeply influenced by Roman art and design. The St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, designed by Michelangelo, stands as one of the greatest architectural achievements of this revival. Niccolò Machiavelli, in his works such as The Prince, revived Roman political theory, analyzing power through the lens of Roman history. Humanism, a philosophy that celebrated the value of the individual and the study of classical antiquity, became central to the intellectual life of the time. For Renaissance thinkers, Rome was not just a city or an empire. It was a symbol of human achievement, a place where civilization had flourished, where laws and governance had been perfected, and where great minds had shaped the future of the world. The papacy and the eternal city Rome also experienced a rebirth in its own right. As the seat of the Catholic Church, Rome remained a place of spiritual power, and the papacy became an increasingly influential force in European politics. The Pope, once a humble religious leader, now controlled vast territories and wielded influence over kings and emperors. In the 16th century, under the reign of Pope Julius II, Rome became the center of art, culture, and politics in Europe. The Vatican grew into one of the greatest centers of art and scholarship, and the Pope commissioned some of the finest works of art in history. The Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo, and the St. Peter's Basilica, designed by Donato Bramante, Michelangelo, and others, would stand as lasting symbols of Rome's enduring legacy, despite the fall of its empire. Rome's lasting impact on Western civilization. Though the physical empire of Rome was gone, its cultural, legal, and political influence continued to shape the development of Western civilization for centuries to come. Roman law became the basis for the legal systems of many European countries, including France, Germany, and Italy. Roman engineering continued to inspire the construction of roads, bridges, and aqueducts. Roman philosophy, especially the Stoic ideas of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, found their way into the writings of later thinkers such as Descartes, Montesquieu, and John Locke, influencing the Age of Enlightenment and the creation of modern democracy. The Latin language, once spoken by all Romans, evolved into the Romance languages: Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, and Romanian. Latin itself continued to be the language of scholarship, science, and religion for centuries, and its legacy persists in many fields to this day. Even in the modern world, the idea of Rome's greatness, its military might, its law, its culture remains embedded in the collective memory of the West. The term Roman is still associated with ideals of strength, unity, and civilization. The end of empire, but not of Rome. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. The collapse of the Eastern Roman Empire in 1453, and the end of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806 marked the official end of Rome's political domination. But the idea of Rome as a symbol of greatness, unity, and cultural achievement lived on. Rome may no longer be an empire, but its legacy will forever remain in the languages we speak, the laws we follow, the art we admire, and the way we govern ourselves. Rome's story is not just one of conquest and collapse, but of enduring influence that shaped the world for over 2,000 years. In the wake of Rome's fall, a new era began, one that historians often call the Dark Ages. The decline of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD had plunged Europe into a period of political fragmentation and uncertainty. The magnificent cities, roads, and infrastructure that once united the empire began to deteriorate as invaders and internal conflicts caused chaos across the former Roman territories. But even in this era of decline, new powers and ideas began to emerge that would shape the future of Europe, including the Holy Roman Empire, which would become the central institution of medieval Europe. The fragmented Western world, after the fall of Rome, Europe was divided into numerous smaller kingdoms, ruled by the remnants of barbarian tribes. The once unified Roman Empire had become a patchwork of Germanic, Frankish, and Viking realms, all vying for dominance in the wake of Rome's collapse. The Visigoths took control of Spain. The Ostrogoths ruled Italy for a time, only to fall to the Lombards. The Franks established a powerful kingdom in Gaul, led by Clovis I, who would eventually convert to Christianity, aligning himself with the Church and setting the stage for a Christian European monarchy. Meanwhile, the Vikings launched their raids across Europe, further destabilizing the continent. During this time, the great cities of the Roman Empire fell into ruin. Rome itself became a shadow of its former glory, a city abandoned by the imperial government and left vulnerable to attacks from the barbarians. The Mediterranean world, once a hub of commerce and culture, now became divided between competing tribes and kingdoms. The rise of Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire amidst the chaos of the Dark Ages. A new figure emerged, Charlemagne, the king of the Franks, who would become the first Holy Roman Emperor. Charlemagne sought to unite much of Western Europe under his rule, believing that the unity of the Roman Empire could be recreated in the form of a new empire. His reign, which began in 768 AD, would mark the beginning of the Carolingian Renaissance, a brief revival of Roman culture, learning, and governance in the West. In 800 AD, Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III in Rome, an act that would forever intertwine the Christian Church and the legacy of Rome. This event marked the foundation of the Holy Roman Empire, which, while never truly a continuation of the ancient Roman Empire, would serve as the focal point of political power in medieval Europe for the next 1,000 years. Although Charlemagne's empire would eventually fragment into smaller kingdoms upon his death, his reign demonstrated that the memory of Rome, the idea of a unified Christian empire, still held immense power. His empire, though short-lived, set the stage for the rise of the feudal system and the enduring influence of the Church in European affairs, the papacy and the struggle for power. As the Holy Roman Empire began to take shape, the papacy emerged as one of the most influential institutions in Europe. The Pope, as the head of the Catholic Church, wielded tremendous spiritual and temporal power. Rome, once the capital of a pagan empire, had now become the center of Christianity. The Papal States were formed in central Italy, and the Pope became not just a religious figure, but also a political leader. However, the papacy would face numerous challenges to its authority. The Church's power was often contested by secular rulers who saw the Pope as a rival, and this tension would define much of medieval European politics. The investiture controversy in the 11th century, for example, pitted the Pope against the Holy Roman Emperor in a struggle for control over the appointment of bishops. Despite these conflicts, the papacy remained a dominant force in European politics, acting as a unifying institution across the divided kingdoms of Europe. The Church's ability to maintain the ideals of Roman law and Christian morality made it the central authority in a fractured world. The influence of Roman culture on the medieval world, though the physical Roman Empire was gone, its culture, institutions, and ideas continued to exert influence over the medieval world. Roman law, which had been codified during the reign of Emperor Justinian, became the foundation for the legal systems of many European kingdoms. Latin, the language of the Romans, remained the language of the Church, scholarship, and diplomacy throughout the Middle Ages. Roman philosophy, especially the works of Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, continued to be studied by medieval scholars, influencing their ideas on ethics and governance. Roman architecture also left a lasting mark on the medieval world. Many medieval churches and castles were built using Roman engineering principles, including the use of arches, vaults, and domes. Even in a time of darkness and division, the cultural legacy of Rome provided a foundation for the medieval world to build upon. The decline of the Holy Roman Empire. Despite its initial promise, the Holy Roman Empire was not a true continuation of the Roman Empire. It was a fragmented collection of states, each with its own ruler, often in conflict with one another. The empire was more of a theocratic monarchy than a unified political entity. Over the centuries, the papacy's influence continued to rise, while the emperor's power diminished. The empire would continue to exist until 1806, but its political unity had long since disintegrated. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the Protestant Reformation and the subsequent 30 Years' War further weakened the Holy Roman Empire. The rise of powerful nation-states such as France, Spain, and England overshadowed the influence of the empire. In the end, the Holy Roman Empire did not fulfill the vision of a unified Roman Empire, but rather it marked the enduring idea of Rome, an idea that had survived centuries of change, conflict, and fragmentation. As the Middle Ages gradually gave way to the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration emerged as a new chapter in the history of the West. This period, beginning in the 15th century, marked a profound shift in Europe's global outlook, as new lands, were discovered, ancient trade routes were revitalized, and European powers began to stretch their influence across the world. The legacy of Rome, especially in terms of navigation, engineering, and political organization, began to play a central role in the creation of these new global empires. The rediscovery of the classical world during the Renaissance sparked the imagination of explorers who often looked to ancient maps, mythologies, and histories for guidance as they sailed into unknown waters. The expansion of European powers' age of exploration was fundamentally driven by a desire to reclaim the glory of Rome and its empire. Europeans, emboldened by the Renaissance revival of classical knowledge, set their sights on new horizons, seeking not only wealth but the spread of Christianity and the restoration of the power and prestige that had once belonged to the Roman Empire. Christopher Columbus, sponsored by Spain, embarked on his famous journey in 1492, seeking a new route to Asia, but instead discovering the Americas. His voyages opened the door to the European colonization of the New World. Vasco da Gama sailed around the Cape of Good Hope in 1498, establishing direct sea routes to India and further expanding the Portuguese Empire in Asia. Ferdinand Magellan, in 1519, embarked on the first successful circumnavigation of the globe, a feat that symbolized the immense power of European exploration. In the wake of these voyages, Spain, Portugal, France, and England competed for control over new territories, establishing vast overseas empires that would stretch from the Americas to Asia. Much like the Roman Empire before them, these emerging European empires sought to establish dominance through the spread of culture, religion, and governance. The Roman influence on exploration, the idea of empire, which had been shaped by the Romans, was deeply embedded in the mindset of these explorers and their sponsors. Roman military tactics, engineering, and governance were key inspirations for how the European empires would attempt to dominate new territories. The Romans had mastered the art of colonization, building roads, fortresses, and cities across their empire. In a similar manner, the Europeans sought to build new colonial outposts, forts, and trading posts in distant lands. These colonies were meant to serve as extensions of European empires, just as Roman provinces had been integral to the expansion of Rome itself. Furthermore, the Roman influence on governance continued to inspire European rulers. Roman law and the organization of Roman military structures provided a model for colonial administration. The concept of the imperium, a supreme and divine power, was reflected in the European monarchies who saw themselves as inheritors of Rome's imperial glory. The spread of Christianity and Roman ideals, alongside the expansion of empire, the spread of Christianity, Rome's legacy religion, became a central mission for European powers. The Roman Empire had once adopted Christianity as the state religion, and now European nations sought to spread it to new lands. Missionaries from Spain and Portugal carried the message of Christianity to the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Much like the Roman legions had marched into new territories, European missionaries sought to convert native peoples, establishing churches and building Catholic institutions across the globe. Christianity in many ways became the religion of empire, with the power of the Catholic Church bolstering the authority of European rulers as they extended their reach across the oceans. The missions mirrored the Roman imperial project, combining both cultural conquest and religious conversion into a singular enterprise. The decline of Roman ideals and the rise of modern nation-states. Despite the initial success of the European colonial empires, the idea of Rome as an imperial power began to fade as modern nation-states began to take shape in the early 17th century. The rise of absolute monarchies, the Reformation, and the Age of Enlightenment all contributed to the slow dismantling of the Roman-inspired political system. By the 18th century, new ideas of governance began to take hold, ideas grounded in the concepts of nationhood and sovereignty, not empire. Thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau challenged the Roman notions of empire and centralized authority, arguing for more democratic and egalitarian systems of governance. The Roman model of a centralized empire would give way to more modern political structures. At the same time, the French Revolution in 1789 signaled the end of monarchies that had claimed the mantle of Roman authority. The French Republic rejected the imperial idea of absolute rule, embracing instead the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Roman Republic, once the symbol of Rome's greatness before its empire, was invoked as a model for a new kind of governance, Rome's legacy in modern culture. Though the empire had fallen, Rome's legacy lived on through the arts, culture, and law of Western civilization. The idea of Rome, its grandeur, its military might, and its cultural achievements continues to inspire the Western world. Even in modern times, we see traces of Roman ideals in the structures of government, law, and architecture. The United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. is modeled after the ancient Roman temples. Roman law continues to influence the legal systems of many nations, including the United States and European Union. Furthermore, Roman literature, philosophy, and history remain central to Western education, with the works of Cicero, Virgil, Tacitus, and Seneca still taught in schools and universities. The Roman spirit of public service, law, and engineering continues to shape the very fabric of modern society. Though the Roman Empire fell, its influence never truly disappeared. Its profound contributions to law, government, architecture, and culture have endured for millennia, molding the foundations of Western civilization. The fall of the empire in the 5th century AD marked the end of an era, but in many ways it set the stage for the world we live in today. The fall of Rome was not a singular event. It was the culmination of centuries of decline, economic collapse, invasions, political instability, and social upheaval. However, rather than disappearing into obscurity, the spirit of Rome survived, adapting and transforming over time. Rome's influence permeated all aspects of life, guiding the evolution of Western thought and Western society. Roman law and governance, the backbone of modern legal systems. The Romans were pioneers in developing a comprehensive legal system that would shape future civilizations. The Corpus Juris Civilis, a compilation of Roman law, remains one of the most significant legacies of the Roman Empire. Even after the fall of the empire, Roman law continued to serve as a model for future legal systems, particularly in Europe. Roman law influenced the development of civil law systems that govern most countries today, including countries in Europe, Latin America, and parts of Asia. The concept of justice, as well as the idea that law should be applied equally to all citizens, emerged from Roman ideals: the right to a fair trial, the concept of private property, and the presumption of innocence are all ideas that stem from Roman legal practices. In modern European Union law, many of the principles found in Roman law still serve as the foundation for legal discourse and the functioning of modern governance. Roman architecture and engineering. Foundations of the modern world, Roman engineering marvels have shaped not only their own time, but also the future of architectural and engineering achievements. The Romans constructed monumental structures, built vast road networks, and pioneered innovative techniques that remain influential today. The Roman arch, vault, and dome influenced Western architecture for centuries. Iconic structures like the Pantheon in Rome, with its vast dome, stand as a testament to Roman engineering ingenuity. The Roman aqueducts, used to bring water into cities, served as models for later systems in medieval and modern times. Their vast road networks, stretching across the empire from Britain to North Africa, were the first major infrastructures that linked the entire empire, and their influence can be seen in modern highways and transportation systems. The construction of fortresses, amphitheaters, and public buildings created architectural legacies that continued to influence the design of modern cities and buildings worldwide. The spread of Christianity and its Roman roots. Perhaps one of the most lasting and profound legacies of Rome is its adoption of Christianity as the state religion under Emperor Constantine in the 4th century AD. By embracing Christianity, Rome set the stage for the faith to become the dominant religious force in Europe and the Western world for centuries to come. The Roman Empire's vast networks of roads and cities, originally designed to support military and administrative functions, became the channels through which Christianity spread throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The Roman Catholic Church, which emerged after the fall of the Empire, continued to serve as the central authority for much of Europe during the Middle Ages. The papacy became a major political and spiritual force, wielding power over kings and emperors alike. Christianity's spread across the globe, combined with its Roman roots, has shaped not just religious thought, but also cultural and ethical values throughout the Western world. The Renaissance. A revival of Roman ideals. The fall of the Roman Empire might have seemed like the end of Roman glory, but the Renaissance, which began in the 14th century, was a revival of Roman ideas, arts, and culture. Scholars, artists, and architects rediscovered and celebrated the ancient world, drawing inspiration from the works of Cicero, Virgil, Plato, and Aristotle, as well as from Roman architectural ruins. The Renaissance saw a revival of classical education and an intense study of Roman texts. The humanist movement, with its emphasis on individual potential and the value of classical learning, looked back to Rome as the pinnacle of human achievement. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael sought to emulate the proportions and aesthetics of Roman sculpture and painting in their own works. Architects like Filippo Brunelleschi and Andrea Palladio studied and adapted Roman building techniques in their designs for churches, palaces, and public buildings. Roman culture and philosophy. The foundation of Western thought, Roman culture and philosophy, laid the groundwork for many of the intellectual movements that would shape Western thought. Roman philosophers such as Seneca, Cicero, and Marcus Aurelius wrestled with questions of ethics, justice, and the human condition, issues that would later be explored by the Enlightenment thinkers of the 18th century. Stoicism, the philosophy championed by Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, emphasized rationality, virtue, and self-control, providing a moral framework that has influenced Western ethical thinking up to the present day. Cicero's work in rhetoric and political theory helped shape the development of democratic ideals, which would later influence the formation of modern republics such as the United States. The Romans were instrumental in preserving and transmitting the philosophical works of the Greeks, acting as a bridge between the ancient world and the modern era. The lasting legacy of Rome, a civilization that never truly fell. Though the Roman Empire may have fallen in the 5th century, its ideas, cultural achievements, and innovations have left an indelible mark on the course of history. From law to architecture, from governance to religion, the legacy of Rome shaped the medieval period, the Renaissance, and continues to influence modern civilization today. The rise of democratic ideals, the flourishing of Christianity, the development of modern science, and the growth of global trade all owe much to the foundations laid by the Romans. Roman ideals, including the pursuit of justice, the importance of civic duty, and the value of education, continue to resonate in the institutions of today's societies. The ruins of ancient Rome scattered across the Mediterranean serve as silent reminders of a civilization that may have fallen, but whose ideas and accomplishments remain timeless. As the final page turns on the epic saga of the Roman Empire, we find that its influence has not simply endured, but continues to resonate in the modern world. The empire's physical borders may have been dismantled, its armies scattered, and its cities reduced to rubble, but its intellectual, cultural, and political legacies have lived on through history, forming the very backbone of the societies that followed. The fall of Rome marked a pivotal moment in history, but it also served as the launching point for the future of Western civilization. While the Middle Ages saw the decline of many of the empire's institutions, the core ideas of Rome found new life in the Renaissance and were eventually reborn in the Age of Enlightenment, which ushered in modern democracy and global exploration. These later eras would prove that the fall of Rome did not mark the end of its influence. Rather, it was a transformation that would echo throughout the centuries. Roman ideals in modern democracy, one of the most enduring legacies of Rome, is its contribution to the concept of democracy and the development of republican governance. While ancient Rome's political system was deeply flawed and could not be fully replicated in its entirety, many of its fundamental ideas became the foundation of modern democratic systems. The Roman Republic, with its Senate, assemblies, and system of checks and balances, influenced the creation of the modern republic. Founding fathers of the United States like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson drew inspiration from Roman governance when drafting the U.S. Constitution. The idea of a government that derives its power from the people, the balance of powers between different branches of government, and the protection of individual rights are all rooted in the Roman tradition. Roman concepts of civic duty, public service, and the rule of law continue to serve as ideals in modern governance. The Latin phrase civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, embodied the rights and duties of being part of a great republic. Today, many citizens around the world still hold a similar sense of pride in their civic identity, whether through national service, participation in elections, or advocacy for justice. Roman architecture and modern urban design. Roman architecture remains a foundational influence on modern urban planning and building design. The scale and ambition of Roman structures, from the Colosseum to the Pantheon, set a standard for architectural achievement that continues to inspire. The Roman arch, dome, and vault have been adopted in countless modern buildings, particularly in governmental and religious structures. The U.S. Capitol building, with its iconic dome, was directly influenced by Roman architectural traditions. Similarly, neoclassical architecture, which surged in the 18th century, was inspired by the classical styles of ancient Rome. In urban design, the Roman mastery of road construction and city planning left a legacy of efficient infrastructure. Many modern cities still follow the Roman grid system, where roads are laid out in a grid pattern, making navigation simpler and more systematic. The Roman road system, which spanned the empire and linked cities across continents, inspired later infrastructural projects, including modern highways and railways. Roman culture and philosophy in modern thought. The intellectual legacy of Rome is equally profound. Roman philosophy, particularly the works of Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, introduced ideas about ethics, governance, and the human condition that still inform modern philosophy, psychology, and political thought. Stoicism, which became the guiding philosophy for Roman leaders, has seen a resurgence in modern times, influencing contemporary self-help and mindfulness movements. The Stoic emphasis on resilience, personal virtue, and self-discipline offers timeless guidance for individuals seeking to navigate the challenges of the modern world. The works of Cicero on rhetoric and law helped shape the development of public discourse and legal systems in the West. His ideas on the relationship between law and morality are still central to legal theory today. Moreover, the Roman commitment to the value of education and public service remains deeply ingrained in modern Western societies. Many modern universities and academic disciplines trace their roots to Roman educational traditions, which emphasized rhetoric, philosophy, and law. Rome's spiritual legacy in the realm of religion. The The Roman Empire's embrace of Christianity helped to shape the development of the Christian Church into one of the most influential institutions in the world. The Catholic Church, which emerged after the fall of the Empire, would become a central force in Europe during the Middle Ages and continue to exert spiritual authority for centuries to come. The Papal States held sway over large portions of Italy, and the Pope became a key political figure in Europe, claiming a level of authority over kings and emperors. The establishment of Christianity as the Roman state religion paved the way for its eventual spread across the globe, making it the world's most widely practiced faith. Even today, Christianity's Roman roots are still evident in the Vatican and the ongoing influence of the Catholic Church on global affairs. The Church's preservation of ancient texts and philosophical writings helped to bridge the gap between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, keeping alive the intellectual traditions of the ancient world. Rome's enduring cultural influence in the modern era, the legacy of Roman art, literature, and history, remains a key pillar of Western education. The classics, which include the works of Virgil, Ovid, Horace, and Livy, continue to be studied in schools and universities across the world. Their stories, whether of heroes, emperors, or gods, resonate deeply with contemporary audiences, offering timeless insights into human nature and society. Roman art and sculpture, with its emphasis on realism and the human form, set the standard for later artistic movements, particularly during the Renaissance and Neoclassicism. The enduring appeal of Roman culture is evident in the collections of art museums worldwide and in the popularity of historical films and novels that draw inspiration from Roman history. The eternal Rome, in the end, the Roman Empire, despite its fall, stands as a testament to the enduring power of ideas. It was an empire of vision, innovation, and ambition, qualities that transcended its physical boundaries and have influenced centuries of Western civilization. The spirit of Rome, in its pursuit of greatness, still reverberates through our modern world. The ruins of the Roman Empire may have crumbled, but its legacy endures in the ideals it left behind, the structures it built, and the philosophies it nurtured. Rome may have fallen, but its story, its influence, and its spirit continue to shape the world today.